Hey guys, we've now reached the halfway point of Season 1 of the Rings of Power, and it kind of feels like things might be starting to kick into gear for what has thus far been a pretty slow-paced show. We've got a lot to cover, including the reveal of a major villain, some significant First Age references, and some theory confirmations, so let's get to it. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss future videos covering Tolkien's lore and the Rings of Power here on Nerd of the Rings. We start off with Queen Regent Miriel blessing newborn Numenorian children. And after some tremors, we see the leaves of the white tree being blown in through the opening in the wall. And in some striking imagery, we see Miriel walking toward the tree, only to see water pouring into the city, and massive destroying waves coming to sink the island realm. As Miriel is doused in water, we realize that of course this isn't actually happening, and instead it was a dream. Now the child's name here in the subtitles is Alinel, which I can't discern any meaning from. Though when I heard it, I was sure that they were saying Eilenel. This was the name of the wife of a man named Gorlim in the First Age. What's notable here is that Gorlim is tricked by Sauron, who creates a phantom or illusion of Eilenel, which he uses to trick Gorlim into betraying the location of his leader Barahir. The fact that what we're seeing here is not real could be a nod to this, and the fact that both stories feature Sauron is a nice tie-in as well, if there's a chance the subtitles are wrong. I also must say that I've always enjoyed when large-scale disasters are depicted from the point of view of people. I find it to be far more effective in conveying a sense of dread and doom. While we'll no doubt get some epic wide shots when the Fall of Numenor storyline actually unfolds, I like the use of this vantage point for this scene. It definitely makes me feel excited for the actual fall of Numenor and how they might top this very brief portrayal. Miriel is awakened by her dream, and we see she obviously hasn't been sleeping peacefully, as she actually fell asleep in a chair and not her bed and appears to still be wearing formal attire. We find out from Halbrand's punching bag that Miriel summoned Galadriel that morning, and the guildsmen aren't happy about it, believing that the elf will influence the Queen Regent. We meet Kemen, who is the created son of Pharazon, who goes to tell his father about the crowd gathering. When Kemen makes a statement about trying to be clever, Pharazon says cleverness is for men of small ambition, and that he'd rather have his son be wise. I get the feeling they're kind of going with a Denethor, Faramir, father-son vibe with these two based on this small interaction. Back to this dude whose name I guess is Tamar, and he's riling up people by saying that they're gonna have elf workers who don't age, sleep, or grow tired coming to take their trades, which seems like a pretty big leap of logic here. But the crowd starts chanting the phrase elf lover, which is another one of those lines that just sounds really clunky, and brings to mind that one of the big weaknesses is that the Second Age doesn't have Tolkien's eloquent dialogue to utilize. And hearing things like Tamar's speech and Miriel saying they hammer out the island's future just bring this into sharp focus. On the flip side, I thought Pharazon's speech that immediately followed was really strong. A few notable references here. He says, "We are sons and daughters of the Edain," which, as we heard in the last episode, were the men of the First Age who sided with the elves in the ongoing wars against Morgoth. He then tells of Elros Tar Miniatur, whose host conquered Morgoth himself. Now, Tar Miniatur is the title Elros takes in the elven language of Quenya, meaning High First Ruler. The bigger point that drew my attention was Pharazon's assertion that it was Elros's host who conquered Morgoth. What I think we have here is a demonstration of some revisionist history by the Numenorians, because later in this very episode we'll hear from a far more reliable source in the form of Elrond. The twins would have been just 13 years old at the beginning of the War of Wrath, and the idea that Elros would have been in charge of the entire war against Morgoth by the war's completion when he's 55 is highly unlikely. Pharazon goes on to puff up the men of Numenor, mentioning their great achievements like raising the capital of Ar-Menellos, and promising that they can trust him that elves will never control Numenor. A quick note here, because Ar-Menellos is never mentioned in The Lord of the Rings or its appendices, only in the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales. So this is further proof that the Rings of Power can indeed get permission to use things outside what they strictly bought rights to. Pharazon then orders drinks all around, which as we saw previously, the Numenorians like when someone buys them drinks, but hey, who doesn't? Pharazon shares a bro hug with Tamar, and I think there's more to this than meets the eye. We first saw this dude alongside Pharazon in the court last episode, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's riling people up so Pharazon can come in and play the hero. There's definitely some scheming going on with Pharazon, and it's one of the things I'm really interested in from the Numenor storyline. Turns out Elendil's daughter Eärien witnesses this whole thing and is approached by Pharazon's son. Kemen says of Pharazon that there isn't a name in the city he doesn't know, a crowd he can't turn, and a favor he isn't owed, driving home the point that Pharazon is definitely setting himself up as a man of the people. Now, a quick note, I said in one of my trailer breakdowns that I thought this scene we saw glimpses of felt way too small to be the moment when Pharazon seizes control of Numenor. So the fact that this was just a fairly minor squabble to establish some of his character was nice to see. Kemen offers Eärien wine from the vineyards near Meneltarma. As we've said previously, the Meneltarma is the holy mountain at the center of Numenor, which will come into play later in the Numenor storyline. Next we see Galadriel, Elendil, and Miriel meeting in the court, where Galadriel has shared the news of Sauron and Halbrand. Galadriel says she believes Halbrand is the lost heir in exile to the throne of the Southlands. And if that doesn't sound Aragorn-y enough for you, Galadriel says his people are scattered and leaderless, but could be united behind his banner, in a line that sounds a lot like Elrond describing the world of men in Fellowship of the Ring, scattered, divided, leaderless, before Gandalf says there is one that could unite them. Miriel, showing her disbelief, says she supposes Elendil is a runic emperor, to which Elendil responds with a funny line, just a petty lord actually. Now runic refers to the people of Rhûn, which literally means east in Sindarin, the land where the Easterlings dwell. So Galadriel wants Miriel to reforge the alliance between Numenor and the elves, and Miriel says no thanks. Numenor has chosen another path. So clearly Miriel is still playing this game of either not revealing herself as being among the faithful until absolutely necessary, or as we see later, she might be one who actually struggles with being one of the faithful. Galadriel then makes a power play, saying she requests an audience with the actual ruler of Numenor, Miriel's father, the king. I think this is another scene where overall the dialogue is pretty solid. Galadriel's Tempest line doesn't seem as hokey to me in context, and she caps it off with, "It will not be quelled by you, Regent," which reminded me a bit of Gandalf telling Denethor, "Authority is not given to you to deny the return of the king, steward," except Galadriel, using Miriel's rank as an insult, lands her in the slammer with Halbrand. Next we catch up with Isildur on his cadet ship, where he once again hears the female voice whisper his name as he looks to Numenor. Before I assumed it was the western side of Numenor, where it's hinted the faithful live that Isildur was seeing, but we can see the sun is setting on the far side of the island, which means they are on the east side, so I don't know if there's any geographical logic to this. Isildur intentionally lets a rope slip and gets kicked off the sea guard, and the trainer dude pulls an Umbridge and kicks the Weasley brothers off the team as well. We next see Isildur and his friends in an alleyway having it out over the situation. Turns out this guy is named Valandil, which is a name that pops up 3 times in Tolkien's writings. One is the very first Lord of Andúnië, so one of Isildur's ancestors. Second is actually the name of Isildur's youngest son, from whom Aragorn would be descended. And third is in an abandoned version of the Numenor story, Valandil being the name of Elendil's brother. As we know Valandil will be the name of one of Isildur's sons, I wonder if some tragic end will befall this character, leading Isildur to name his son after him. But back to the story at hand. While Isildur may want to run off to Andúnië, Dwayne the Rock Valandil wanted to be on the boat since he was big enough to hold an oar. The friends have a falling out, coming to blows before going their separate ways. Next we're back with Arondir, and we finally get the reveal of Adar, who looks like a very scarred elf. Lots of theories to go around here. Some think Sauron, but I tend to think he's more likely a corrupted elf. Or perhaps someone who could even be attempting to set himself up as the new Dark Lord, until Sauron comes around to put him in his place. One kind of out there theory that makes a fair amount of sense is that he's Maglor, the only son of Feanor that we are not told of his death. We know his hand was burned by a Silmaril, which could explain the single armored hand. But it's hard to say how they would make this fit with the story without having to explain a lot of unrelated stuff. Adar attends to the orc Arondir stabbed in the neck and seems to show genuine care for him. And at first I thought, oh, this dude's gonna heal him. But nope, he stabs him. But he does seem sad about it. We see the orc had taken one of the elven chest plates as Adar wipes off his knife. One of the orcs bows down and says, Nampak Uglursha, before taking off the chest plate. I don't have the literal translation yet, but Jed Brophy was kind enough to fill me in. It is indeed a sort of rest in peace sentiment, and not a thanks for the cool vest. The orcs leave and Adar talks to Arondir in Quenya, asking where he was born. Arondir says Beleriand, which really surprised me because the map of the world from the prologue sequence in episode 1 completely omitted the lands of Beleriand. Thankfully, I just so happen to have my Beleriand map so we can take a look. Adar guesses that Arondir is from the mouth of the river. Presumably he means the river Sirion, which indeed has a mouth feeding into the sea. Arondir doesn't answer, so we don't know if that's the case. But it's interesting because the inhabitants of the mouth of Sirion are a group of Teleri elves known as the Falathrim, led by Círdan the Shipwright, and would also include Gil-galad, though Noldorin refugees from Gondolin would later join them. Now, Ismael Cruz Cordova has said that Arondir is a Sylvan elf, which I think would make him far more likely to live in Osiriand. As for Adar, he says he went down the river once when he was young, and I noticed it seems like his armor even has the depiction of a river on it, perhaps. He goes on to say he's not a god, at least not yet. He ignores all the questions Arondir asks for us, like, what are you? And tells him to go to the watchtower where the men have taken refuge, and tell them to join him or die. We catch up with the men, and Bronwyn comments that people have come from every village from there to Orodruin. And I realized the reason I didn't catch this at first is because she pronounces it Orodruin. Theo goes on a side mission to get food with his bestie, who remember cut himself on Theo's broken sword. And it's really quick, but I think Rowan here isn't looking too good. In fact, I'd say he's starting to look familiar, as he might have been stabbed by a Morgul blade. So that theory of mine from before the show even started about the shard being the first Morgul blade could have some traction. Theo runs into the orc Vrath and stabs the bottom of the hilt into his own arm to bring back the blade. It's pretty clear that this is what the orcs have been searching for. Back in Eregion, the dwarves are rocking out on building Celebrimbor's new tower. As Elrond remarks on the wonder of elves and dwarves working together, Celebrimbor is taken aback by Elrond's likeness to his father, who he says he met many times. He reveals Eärendil once told him that one day Celebrimbor's future would be in his son's hands. This makes me wonder if it means this deal with the dwarves, or if perhaps this refers to a future event, possibly when Elrond leads an army to aid Eregion under attack by Sauron. Celebrimbor is bummed because Durin is either avoiding him or hiding something, which hey, it could be both. Remember, Celebrimbor in episode 2 expressed his admiration for the dwarves, and a desire to see them at work in their mountain. Something likely denied to him at this point despite their working together on the tower. Elrond visits Disa, who pretty convincingly lies about Durin's whereabouts, but Elrond discovers it soon enough. Here we get our first ever glimpse at Elven sight, as Elrond observes a conversation between Disa and Durin, revealing he's been at the old mine below the Miramir. Now the Miramir is on the east side of the Misty Mountains, and it's where the original Durin stopped and saw 7 stars arranged in a crown above his reflection, leading him to go into the mountain there and establish Khazad-dum. Real quick, I thought it was really cool to see this elven sight at play. One of my gripes thus far about Galadriel is that she has no magic about her. I'd love to see a bit more subtle magic at play in instances instead of these things where Galadriel punches ice or gets caught in a jail cell as we see later. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but these dwarven face masks remind me of depictions of First Age dwarves who could withstand the fires of dragons thanks to their armor and helms with full face masks. Elrond discovers the secret entrance and shows why you shouldn't teach secret password songs to your kids. There he finds Durin, who makes Elrond swear an oath to not reveal the secret he's about to tell him. As I've said before, in Tolkien's world, oaths have power. They are not something easily discarded. So when Durin says if he breaks it, it will doom Elrond and his kin to sorrow until his last day on Middle-earth, this is exactly what the stakes are. Elrond swears on the memory of his father Eärendil the Mariner, and Durin reveals the discovery of a new ore, lighter than silk and harder than iron. Durin says the dwarves call it grey glitter, but guesses in Elvish it would be mithrald, which translates to grey metal. Elrond corrects him saying mithril, which means grey brilliance. Durin tells Elrond to keep the piece of mithril as a token of their friendship, and they're interrupted by a cave-in. Now I may be hearing things, but it almost sounds like there could be a roar in the noise here. Perhaps this whole thing is caused by the Balrog rolling over in his sleep. Again, we hear someone call out Galadriel's borderline craziness as Halbrand chats with her. He goes on to say that you should find out what your opponent most fears, then give them a way of mastering it so you can master them. And this gives off major Sauron vibes, because as we'll see in the Fall of Numenor arc, this is pretty much what Sauron does with the issue of mortality, which is what most Numenorians fear. Halbrand helps Galadriel realize that maybe if she would occasionally pause for a moment to use her brain, she might notice things like the fact that Miriel only threw her in prison when she brought up the king. And she uses this newfound perspective to kind of beat up a few guards. Anyway, we see Halbrand advising Pharazon to not interfere, and the whole thing makes it seem all the more like Halbrand is Sauron, the way he ever so gently nudges Pharazon to do what he wants. And I wonder if we'll later discover that Halbrand and Pharazon have a further conversation after the camera cuts away. Isildur and Eärien chat about Isildur's misfortune in front of a dilapidated mural that looks like men and elves fighting a fish dragon. Galadriel bursts into the king's tower to find Miriel there with an ailing Palantir. When Galadriel asks why Miriel isn't faithful to the elves like her father, Miriel leads her up a stairway, saying her father had become more outspoken about reconnecting with the elves after his coronation. And here we get what will no doubt be one of the big potential references of the episode everyone will catch, as Galadriel takes a long look at a sword that looks very similar in design to Narsil from the Peter Jackson films. While I think many, including myself, assumed Narsil would be passed down the line of the Lords of Endunier, there's no such record of the sword before it comes into Elendil's possession in the late Second Age. Also behind Galadriel, we have what appears to be a depiction of Beren and Luthien, with Luthien standing and Beren holding a Silmaril in his hand. The very next shot features an axe, which is almost certainly Dremborleg, the great axe of Tuor, the grandfather of Elrond and Elros. This axe was known to be among the heirlooms of the rulers of Numenor, and sure enough, it's sitting near a swan shield, which also belonged to Tuor. Miriel reveals that Palantir once brought her to the tower, and reveals a Palantir, one of the 7, with the other 6 lost or hidden. I believe the other 6 are likely in possession of the faithful Numenorians on the west coast. Now I've got an entire video on the Palantiri, but of note is that they were originally created by none other than Feanor, the craftsman of the Silmarils. Galadriel looks into the Palantir and sees the same vision where Numenor is taken by the sea. Now the natural question that will arise is, can the Palantiri do more than communicate with one another? And can they see into the future? The first answer is yes. The second is more questionable. As Gandalf says in The Two Towers, "Even now my heart desires to test my will upon it, to see if I could not wrench it from him, and turn it where I would, to look across the wide seas of water and of time, to Tirion the fair, and perceive the unimaginable hand and mind of Feanor at their work, while both the white tree and the golden were in flower. So Gandalf certainly has no doubt that he can use a Palantir to look across the seas of water and of time, though he does only mention past events. Another potential reference here is I think we might see the actual dragon helm of Dor-lómin behind Galadriel. It's really hard to make out, but I think we might have the dragon on top, and we're seeing it in its full dwarven face-masked glory. We're never told what happened to the helm after Hurin is given it after the death of his son Turin. So having the helm of a heroic, though tragic, figure among the Edain end up in Numenor isn't much of a stretch. Galadriel wants Miriel to send an army with her to save the Southlands, and Miriel says, nah. Next we catch up with Theo, who's being pursued by orcs, and Arondir kills off Vrath. And it's officially the first time I've ever been bummed to see an orc taken out because it's Jed Brophy's orc. Arondir helps Theo get back to his mom in a really, really long slow motion section. Too long. Arondir does his cool arrow catch and throw, still in slow-mo that I was really hoping would be in full speed to show off how awesome elves are. And we've still hardly started this slow-mo portion. They're bailed out by the sun, and we have a nice vocal transition to Disa singing a lament for the trapped dwarves of the cave-in. Durin arrives and reveals that they all made it out alive, and his father has declared the entire mine to be sealed off, and Durin is not having it. Elrond gives us a bit of a rundown of his dad's story, and it's really fun, because it's probably the most straight lore with no changes we've gotten in the entire show. It's glorious. And I really love Elrond's reaction and lesson for Durin, that he would be happy to hear any judgment, whether he made his father proud or disappointed, for it would mean that he would get to see his father again. For me personally, this relationship between Durin and Elrond, and the Khazad-dum storyline as a whole, is the one that's really clicking. This sweet moment is followed up with some lighthearted banter about how Elrond and Durin met, and we see Durin come to his father. Durin III tells his son that the dwarves believe when a new king is crowned, the voices of all his forebears flow into him, sharing their counsel, wisdom, and mistakes. And it's another genuinely heartfelt moment when the king says, "Ever am I with you." It seems like this idea of the voices might play into how they're going to attempt to explain there being two Durins at once. I'm still not sold on the idea. I'm willing to see how it plays out, but as of now, I'm still wishing they had just picked a different name for the king. Despite Elrond being awesome and encouraging him to have a great dad moment, Durin says he thinks there's something more at work, and they resolve that he should go to Lindon and find out what it is. I think if there's anything nefarious going on, it's going to come from either Gil-galad or Celebrimbor, not Elrond. And that Elrond will be put in a tight place between commitment to his people and commitment to his friend. Back in the Southlands, creepy barkeep guy reveals that he has the scar from using the sword just like Theo. No question this guy is bad news and loyal to Sauron. And he seems to think that the meteor was a sign that Sauron's time has come. Meanwhile, Adar is told by the orcs the blade is in the tower, no doubt setting up a big conflict next week. Back in Numenor, Galadriel is shipped off and Elendil quietly says, "Go in peace" in Quenya. However, as Miriel and Pharazon go to return to the court, they see leaves falling like crazy from the white tree. And Elendil and Miriel make eye contact, and it's apparent they both know what an ill omen this is. And I think the added layer here is that this could be the moment they fully realize they can trust one another as members of the faithful. Miriel gives a speech where she reveals she will personally accompany Galadriel back to Middle-earth and aid the Southlands that are under siege. Surprisingly, it seems that Pharazon is on board with this. So he isn't about to make his move quite yet. It makes me wonder if he'll instead strike while Miriel is away. Elendil reads the news to the people and asks for volunteers to go to Middle-earth, which I thought was a little odd that Numenor wouldn't already have armies to just spring into action. Perhaps there's a reason they want volunteers, but I can't help but wonder how Numenor is going to come off as this glorious military power when they're just plucking people from the street. I guess at least Isildur and his buddies have nautical training, but it sure gives off the vibe that it's just random people volunteering, which doesn't sound like it would work out too well, and definitely doesn't sound like it would portray the type of force that would leave Sauron's forces shaking in their boots. So there you have it, folks, half a season of Rings of Power down already, and for me at least, it seems like the plot has finally started shifting into gear. Personally, I like this episode as we got some good groundwork for the big power players in Numenor, but also the Elrond Durin stuff continues to shine. Getting further traction in the Adar Arondir storyline helps as well, and after last week's shenanigans, it's nice to have a break from the hobbits. But let me know what you guys think in the comments, and once again, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss tomorrow's Tolkien lore video here on Nerd of the Rings. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Listen Me the Cinda, Kella Brimbor, The Mighty Mim, Team Weasel, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Toby Mob's Music, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Darricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.